We're going to run through this quickly because we missed DAF Mendel together. We're going to look at the very end of Mendel on the base, at least to get a little shtickle from Mendel. The Mishnah had told us that B'chol Yom Haya Zahavaya Rok, that Yom Kippur had a lot of special features. Every other day, when the Kohen Gadol or the Kohen Gadol would use the censer pan for the incense, he would use a certain quality of gold, which was called a greenish gold. But on Yom Kippur, he would use a reddish gold. It was a higher quality of gold. Amar Rav Chisda Shiva Zahavim Hein. Rav Chisda says there are 7 types of gold. Zahav, the first kind is plain gold. Then you have Zahav Tov. Then you have good gold. That's the second grade of gold. It's actually a formal name. And then you have Zahav Ophir. That's number 3. Number 4 is Zahav Mofaz. Number 5 is Zahav Shachut. Number 6 is Zahav Sagur. And number 7 is Zahav Parvim. And these are all based on psukim, as is, Zahav Parvayim appears in Divrei Hayamim. Zahav Sagur appears in Malachim. Zahav Shachut appears also in Menachem. A lot of these things are in this description of the first temple. Okay, so now the Gemara says Zahav is standard gold. That doesn't even need a citation. Zahav Tov, what's it based on? Dichsiv uZahav haaretz hahi tov. The Torah talks about the gold that was found around one of the rivers by the Garden of Eden, and it says the gold of that place was good. Next, Zahav Ophir. Why is it called Zahav Ophir? Da'ase me Ophir. It comes from a place called Ophir. Zahav Mofaz, Shadom Lapaz. The reason it's called Mofaz is because it glistens like pearls. It's so shiny. Zahav Shachut is why? Because Shenit Vekachut. The word Shachut means like it's slaughtered. It very easily comes apart. That it's extremely pliable and malleable so that you can weave it like thread. And Zahav Sagur, B'shasheniftach kol chanuyos niskaros, that it's called Zahav Sagur because it closes all the other markets. When this gold becomes available, it's such of a fine quality that anyone else selling gold has to close shop because they can't compete. And finally, Zahav Parvim Shadam L'Dam HaParim. Zahav Parvim is the 7th kind of gold because it resembles bull blood. It's got that reddish tinge like a bull. I'm thinking it must have either some kind of copper or iron compound ore mixed in with it. I don't know. Ravashi Omar Chamishahin. Ravashi says there's not 7 kinds of gold, but rather there's 5 kinds of gold that have this special names to them. And he starts with Zahav Ophir, Zahav Mofaz, Zahav Shachut, Zahav Sagur, and Zahav Parvim. B'chol chad isbei Zahav v'Zahav Tov. And each brand of gold has 2 grades. One is the standard grade and one is the good grade. And therefore he has just a different classification. There's really 5, which each one has 2 grades to it. And that's the way he learns it. Now, Tanya Nami Hachi. Now we have a brisa to support this idea that Zahav Parvayim, this Zahav Parvayim is a reddish gold, as we had suggested before. And it's based upon our brisa. That B'chol Yom Haya Zahava Yarok V'Hayom Adom, that all other days the gold was a greenish, and on Yom Kippur it was reddish. V'Hainu Zahav Parvayim Shadom L'Dam HaParim, and that's the Parvayim gold which resembles bull blood in its reddishness. Let us continue. B'chol Yom Makriv Pras Shacharis V'Chulei B'chol Yom Hayisadaka V'Hayom Daka Min Hadaka. The Mishnah then describes the different kinds of the special ketores that was brought on Yom Kippur. On all other days, the ketores that was brought was a finely ground ketores. You can go in my office, guys, if you want. You can go in through here. Shlomo, you can go in through there. The door's open over here. Guys, the door's open over here. There you see. On all other days, the Kohen would bring 2 half measures of ketores, one half measure in the morning and 1 half measure in the afternoon. but on Yom Kippur he would bring an additional amount of Ketoris, which he would brought into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And then the Mishnah had said that on all other days the Ketoris was finely ground, but on Yom Kippur it was finely ground. In other words, they would grind it an additional time to make sure that it was extra special. And B'chol Yom Kohanim Tana Rabbanan Ma Tamulomar Daka Ma Tamulomar V'lo Kvar Nemar V'shachakta Mimeno Hadek Elo Lahavi Daka Min Hadaka. So the Brisa basically says that when the Torah talks about the Ketoris that was brought on Yom Kippur, it says the Ketores Daka. It talks about Ketores Samim Daka. It talks about finely ground Ketores. And the question that the Brisa asks, why does the Torah have to tell me that it's finely ground Ketores if the generic rule of Ketores is that it has to be finely ground? The answer is, it's coming to teach me that it had to be ground in additional time, more than the standard grinding. And next, B'chol Yom Kohanim Olam B'mizracha Shel Kedesh. The next part of the Mishnah told me that on standard days, when the Kohanim ascended the ramp of the Mizbeach, they would ascend on the eastern side and descend on the western side. Now let's just think about it for a second. If you have the diagram of the Mizbeach in your head, the ramp is, the point of ascent of the ramp is on against the southern wall of the temple. It's 16 amos wide, and it's facing south-north, okay? So the direction of the entrance, from the entrance towards the Kodesh HaKadoshim, is east to west. So as you're going up the ramp, you're facing the north, and you're going up. When you start going up the ramp, you're going to be on the east side of the ramp, which means that you're going to be on the right side of the ramp. If you would just imagine in your mind's eye going up the ramp, you're on the right side of the ramp. And when you go down the ramp, you're going down on the western side, which means that as you're coming down, you're facing right from the downwards perspective. Okay? And the Gemara clarifies that this was done on a regular day. On Yom Kippur, what was different was that the Kohen Gadol did not go on the right side of the ramp. He walked right up the center of the ramp. So, what?
That's the HOV lane.
The HOV lane, right. So the Gemara now says, as we had learned that any time you go up the Mizbeach and you circle the Mizbeach, it should always be turning towards the right. And so that's in a counterclockwise direction. So you would ascend the ramp, and immediately you would turn right, which means you would start facing east, and then you'd get to the corner, and then turn again, meaning going left. But it's really leading with your right side is really what the Mishnah means. So you're going in a counterclockwise direction, which is therefore logical that you would be on the right side of the ramp. And as you come down, you're also on the right side, going down on the ramp. V'hayom ola be'emtza v'yored be'emtza. However, the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur would ascend in the center of the ramp and come down the center of the ramp. My time mishum kvoda to Kohen Gadol. What's the reason? It's out of honor to the Kohen Gadol. Today's his day. He gets the HOV line, right? He's the boss. He's the balabas, and so you want to show this bailus. He goes up the center. B'chol yom Kohen Gadol mekadesh yod v'raglav min hakiyar v'chulei. The next thing, at least according to the first opinion of the Mishnah, is that on all other days the Kohen Gadol washed his hands from the same laver as the other Kohanim. But on Yom Kippur we had a special golden cistern for him to wash his hands. So my time, Mishum Kvodo Shel Kohen Gadol, once again out of honor to the Kohen Gadol, today's his day. B'chol yom hayusham arba ma'arachos. Now the Gemara is commenting on the Mishnah, which says we're actually going to see a three-way machlokes. The Mishnah had first started off with the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir had said that on all other days, it almost sounds like Pesach, on all other days we had 4 piles of wood, of burning wood on the Mizbeach. And on Yom Kippur we have a 5th pile. Then we have the opinion of, I think it's Rabbi Yossi, who says, is it Rabbi Yossi or Rabbi Yehuda? I don't remember anymore. It's Rabbi Yossi says every day there were 3 piles, and on Yom Kippur there was 4 piles. And Rabbi Yehuda says no, every day there are 3 piles, and on Yom Kippur there are every day there are 2 piles rather, and on Yom Kippur there are 3 piles. So it's a 3-way machlokes. How many piles do you have on a regular day? Reb Meir says 4, Rabbi Yossi says 3, and Rabbi Yehuda says 2. Tanu Rabbanan. B'chol yom hayushtayim arachos vayom shalosh, echas marachas gedola v'echas marachas shniya shel ketores, ve'echas shemosifin bo bayom diver Rabbi Yehuda. So the brisa goes in the opposite order. It starts with the lowest number, Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says that on normal days you had 2 piles of wood, and on Yom Kippur you added a 3rd pile. So the first pile was called the Maracha Gedola. It was the large pile in the center that was burning, was the large bonfire in the center. Then you had an auxiliary fire that was burning adjacent to it, and that was for the purpose of manufacturing the coals that would burn the ketoris. You have to have a separate fuel source for the ketoris than you have for the regular burning of the karbanos. And the 3rd pile was for the Yom Kippur ketoris, which we're going to call the machta, as we'll see later on. It was for the shovelful of coals that you would use to bring into the Kodesh HaKadoshim and burn the ketoris on it. That's according to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi Omer b'chol yom shalosh v'hayom arba echas shel ma'aracha gedola v'echas ma'aracha shniya shel ketoris v'echas shel kiyum ha'esh v'echas shemosifim bo bayom. Now we go to Rabbi Yossi. He says normally on a regular day there were 3 piles. The 2 that we already mentioned, which means the big pile of wood, then the auxiliary pile for the ketoris, and he says there was a 3rd pile of burning wood, and that was sort of your security. That was what someone called this morning your backup. Right, your backup generator. It was a pile of wood that was burning in case the other 2 piles went out. You would always be able to replenish them from this fire. That was the purpose of this. It was your backup. It was your backup fire. And on Yom Kippur, you added the 4th pile, which was for the additional ketoris for the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Rabbi Meir Omer b'chol yom arba v'hayom chamesh echas shel maracha gedola v'echas shel maracha shniya shel ketoris v'echas shel kiyum ha'esh v'echas le'ivar mu'padarm shel nisachlu mi ba'erev v'echas shemosifim bo bayom. And Rabbi Meir now says finally, normally there were 4 piles. The 3 piles that we already mentioned, which means the main pile, the auxiliary pile for ketoris, the backup pile, and he says the 4th pile of burning wood was what was used for in the event that any of the fats or the innards that were supposed to be burning the entire night did not burn for whatever reason. Sometimes the body parts are like popcorn and they fly off, and then you have to put them back into the fire. So therefore, whatever didn't burn successfully overnight, you would put back into this particular fire. You could not put it back, according to Reb Meir, you can't put it back to the regular fire. You put it in its own special fire. And then you add on Yom Kippur, you have the 5th pile. So the Gemara now, that's the end of the brisa. Dekule alma mihas tarte islu. Everyone holds that there's a minimum of 2. The maracha gedola, the big pile of wood, and the auxiliary pile for the ketoris. Minolim. Where do we know this from? Amar kra hi ha'ola al mokta al hamizbech kol halayla zu maracha gedola. It's based on the following. The pasuk says, when we talk in Parshas Tzav about the korban ola, it says that it's supposed to be burning on the mizbech the entire night. So that mokida, that burning, refers to the main pile of burning wood. And ve'esh hamizbech tukad bo zu maracha shniya shel ketores. The next part of the pasuk says, "Ve'esh hamizbech tukad bo," the fire of the altar shall be burning. That refers to the auxiliary pile for the ketoris. Rabbi Yossi kiyum ha'esh minale. So now the Gemara says, where does Rabbi Yossi, who says that there's an additional pile for your backup fire, where does he get that from? Nafgale me ve'ha'esh al hamizbech tukad bo. There's another pasuk that says, "Ve'ha'esh al hamizbech tukad bo lo sichbe," that the fire shall be burning on the mizbeach. Okay, so that additional pasuk tells me that there's a 3rd pile. But Rabbi Yehuda will tell you, Hahu lahatzosas alisa hudaas. He says that pasuk is not telling you that there should be a 3rd burning pile, but rather it's coming to tell you how you're supposed to ignite the other wood. And there's supposed to be twigs, kindling twigs, on the mizbeach. And that's what the pasuk is telling me, that you always have to have the availability on the mizbeach of kindling twigs to make sure that you can always light the fire at any given moment. Detanya, Hay Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Minayin lahatzosas alisa shalotei ela barosha shel mizbeach. It's because Rabbi Yehuda was quoted as saying in the Brisa, how do you know that there always have to be kindling twigs on top of the mizbeach? Tamulomar v'ha'esh al hamizbeach tukad bo. There has to be always fire that is ignitable on the mizbeach. Amar Rabbi Yossi. But Rabbi Yossi disagrees, and he says, "Minayin sha'osa maracha lakiyim ha'esh tamalomer ve'esh al mizbeach tukad bo." He says no, that same pasuk is coming to teach me that there's supposed to be a backup fire, which is the third pile according to Rabbi Yossi. So now the Gemara says, "Rabbi Yossi had sosas alisa minole." Where does Rabbi Yossi know that you're supposed to have kindling twigs on the mizbeach? Where does he get that from? If he uses the pasuk to teach me the third pile of burning wood. He learns it from another pasuk in the same way that Rib Shimon does. The Tanya, as the Brisa says, "V'nasnu b'nei Aharon hakohen eish al hamizbeach." There's another pasuk that says that the sons of Aharon shall place a fire on the mizbeach. Now that's earlier. That's in Parshas Vayikra, and this pasuk is limed al hatzosas alisa shelo tehei ela bekohen kosher uvekli sharei stiver Rabbi Yehuda. This teaches me that the kindling twigs can only be used by a kohen that's kosher, and he has to use the ministering vestments when he's igniting the larger fire with the kindling twigs. He has to do so with his big day kahuna, with his garments. That's according to Reb Yehuda what that pasuk teaches me. So Amar lo Reb Shimon. So Reb Shimon disagrees. He says, "V'chisale al daitcha shezar karev lagabi mizbeach." Why do you need a pasuk to tell me that only a kohen can do this? If the twigs are on top of the mizbeach, how's a non-Kohen going to get to the top of the Mizbeach in the first place? So you don't need a pasuk to tell me that only a Kohen is allowed to do it. It's obvious because the kindling twigs are on the Mizbeach. So elalimed al hatzosas alisa shelo tehei ela barosha shel mizbeach. But rather it's coming to tell me that the twigs can only be on top of the Mizbeach, they cannot be on the side. Meaning that Reb Shimon says, look, the fact that a Kohen only a Kohen is allowed to ignite the Mizbeach wood, that's clear, because how else is he going to ignite it unless he gets it on the unless he goes up to the Mizbeach? So therefore the pasuk must be teaching me that says Reb Shimon, it must be teaching me that the kindling twigs have to be stored on the top of the Mizbeach. So that's the way Reb Shimon learns it, and the Gemara says that's how Rabbi Yossi will learn it as well. He doesn't need the pasuk that he uses for the third pile for the backup fire. But Rabbi Yehuda says no. Rabbi Yehuda says, you do need a pasuk to tell me that only a Kohen is allowed to ignite the wood on the Mizbeach. You know why? Because if that's your argument, Reb Shimon, that you don't need a pasuk, because how is a non-Kohen going to get on the Mizbeach? Hava amina koyara ve'ofid b'mafucha kamashmalan. I might have thought that there is a way for a non-Kohen to ignite the fire. You know how he can do it? He can stand at the bottom on the floor, at a short distance from the Mizbeach. He can ignite the fire. He can use a bellows to try and blow the flame up to ignite the fire. It'd probably take a lot of skill to do that, but it's doable, he says.
Maybe throw a burning twig up too.
Throw a burning twig and then use a bellows to blow on it, and that would cause it to burn. And he says that's why you need a pasuk to tell me that it can only be done by a Kohen and not by a Zar. But the bottom line is that at least we see that Rabbi Yossi uses a pasuk to teach me that you need a third pile of wood, and Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. The Rabbi Meir, Evarmu Pedarm Shalonisachlu Mibaer of Minale. Now we go to Rabbi Meir. He says you need a fourth pile of wood every day, and that's to burn the innards that did not burn the previous night. Where does he know this from? Nafkale me va'esh. Because the Torah pasuk says ve'esh al hamizbeach. Where does it? Ve'esh hamizbeach tukad. See, he learns it out from the extra letter vav. The extra letter vav is telling me that there's an additional pile. V'rabbanan vav lo darshi. The other rabbis disagree because they say you can't use a vav to tell me an additional halacha. Now, v'rabbanan evarmu pedam shel nisachlu miberev my avid lahu. If according to the other rabbis you don't have an extra pile to burn the innards that didn't burn over the night, what do you do with those innards? So mahadulu l'maracha gedola. According to the other rabbis, you just put it back on the large bonfire in the center. The Tanya, as the Brisa says, Minayin la'ivar mupadarm shalonis achlu mi be'erev shesodron al gabi mizbeach. How do you know, says the Brisa, that if you have body parts that did not burn through the night, and they sort of got popped off to somewhere else, how do you know that you're supposed to put them back on the mizbeach and onto the fire? V'mein machazikan shesodron al kevesh al gabi sovevat sheyasem aracha gedola v'sodron. And furthermore, how do you know that if, let's say, there's no room because you got to set up your firewood first, or you've got other things burning there? How do you know that until you get everything set up, you can temporarily store these body parts on the ramp or on the sovev, which is a ledge in the center of the vertical center of the mizbeach, that you can set them up there temporarily, and then once you got everything set up and the fire is really burning with intensity, you can put those body parts on the fire. Tamul Omar asher tochal ha'esh esaola al hamizbeach. And therefore, as it says in the pasuk, that the fire shall consume the ola on the mizbeach, and that tells me that the entire ola, including those body parts that didn't get burned the night before, are burnt on the mizbeach. But you see from the language of the brisa that you put these things on the maracha gedola, on the main bonfire. For Reb Meir, ichulei ola atamachzir, v'i atamachzir ikulei ketoris. Reb Meir uses the pasuk differently. Reb Meir says the pasuk is not telling you that the ivarim upedarim that did not burn the night before are placed back on the main fire, but rather he says that pasuk is telling me that if you have any parts of the ola that began to burn but did not fully burn, you put those back onto the fire. You put those back onto the mizbeach, but not onto the maracha gedola, not onto the main fire, but you put them into an auxiliary bonfire, right? He says, so what's the pasuk coming to teach you? It's coming to exclude portions of the ketoris that did not burn properly. If you have any portion of the ketoris that did not burn properly, the halacha is that you may not restore it to the outer mizbeach, but you have to, I guess you just don't burn it, or you burn it somewhere else. But that's the point. The point, however, is that Reb Meir uses the pasuk differently, and that's why he says that you have to have a separate bonfire. Detani Rabbi Chananya bar Minyumi b'dervei Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov asher tochal ho'eshes ola al mizbeach ikuli ola atamachzir v'atamachzir ikuli ketoris. And as this is taught in a brisa as well, that according to other Tanoim, the pasuk is coming to teach me that you don't put non-fully burned ketores on the outer altar. Now the Gemara says, "Dekuli alma mihas mosifin bo bayom islu minalu." So now the Gemara says, what we see from this entire discussion in our Mishnah and in the Brises that we've quoted is that everyone agrees that there's an extra pile of wood for the special kitaris on Yom Kippur that is placed on the Mizbeach on Yom Kippur. Where do we get this from? Nafkalahu me viha esh. There's a pasuk also in Parshas Tzav, which says "Ve'ha'esh al hamizbeach tukad bo lo sichbe." Make sure there's a fire burning. So the extra letter Vav and the extra letter Hey teaches me that there's an additional pile on one day out of the year, which is Yom Kippur. Va'filu l'mandelo dorish Vav, Vav Hey dorish. And even if you don't hold like Reb Meir, who says that you can use an extra Vav to teach me a whole halacha, the rabbis disagreed with him, but that's only because it was an extra letter Vav. But if you have an extra letter Vav and an extra letter Hey, those two together you can derive an extra halacha. Now the Gemara says, Eish Tamid Lamai Asa. So now the Gemara says, but there's another pasuk which says, Eish Tamid Tukad al HaMizbeach Lo Sichbe. Have an eternal fire burning on the Mizbeach, do not extinguish it. What does that pasuk teach me? L'chidetanya. Teaches me the halacha that we see in this brisa. It says, Eish Tamid Tukad al HaMizbeach Lo Sichbe, Limeid al Ma'aracha Shaniya Shal Ketores, Shalo Tehei Ela al HaMizbeach HaChitza. This teaches me that the second pile for the ketores on a daily basis must be placed on the outer altar. Now let me just clarify for just a second. Where do you burn the ketores on a daily basis? You don't burn the ketores on a daily basis on the outer altar. You burn the ketores on a daily basis on the golden altar that's inside the heichal, the smaller golden altar that's inside the heichal. But what we're learning now is that the preparation of the coals for the burning of that ketores has to be prepared on the outer altar, and then you transfer those coals in a censer pan over to the golden altar, and you burn the ketoris there. So that's what the pasuk is coming to tell me. So it's telling me that when you prepare the ketoris coals, you prepare them on the outer altar. Now the brisa continues and it says, Eish machta u'menorah minayin. Where do we know that the fire, that's the fuel for the machta, which is the Yom Kippur ketoris, and the fuel for the menorah, the fire for the menorah, where do we know that that too has to be extracted from the outer altar? Vidinu. You can make the following argument: Nemra eish b'ketoris v'nemra eish b'machta u'menorah, because the word eish is mentioned in the context of ketoris. The word eish is mentioned in the context of the Yom Kippur ketores and for the lighting of the menorah, and therefore malahalan al mizbeach achitzon avkan al mizbeach achitzon. So therefore, just like the fire for the ketoris on a daily basis is prepared on the outer altar, so too the fire for the Yom Kippur ketoris and the menorah is prepared on the outer altar. That would be one way of understanding it. But another way of saying it is as follows: Klach l'derech zu. You could look at it this way: Nemra eish b'ketoris v'nemra eish b'machta u'menorah. The word eish is mentioned in the context of the daily ketores, and it's mentioned in the context of the Yom Kippur ketores and of the menorah. Ma lahalan b'samach lo, af machta menorah b'samach lo. So I can make the following argument: where do I prepare the fuel for the burning of the daily ketores? On a place which is adjacent to the place where I will actually do the avoda of the ketoris. So the place which is adjacent to the golden altar is the outer altar. But what is the place of burning which is most adjacent to the lighting of the menorah? Where is the place of burning which is most adjacent to the bringing of the ketoris into the Kodesh HaKadoshim? You could argue that's not the outer altar, but rather the golden altar. So perhaps when it comes to the daily ketores, I should prepare the coals on the outer altar. But maybe for the lighting of the menorah and for the Yom Kippur ketores, I should prepare those coals, the fuel source, on the golden altar, which is more adjacent to those two places. And therefore, so what's the answer? Talmud lomar, eish tamid tukad al mizbech lo sichbe. That's why I have the pasuk. It says that when I have an eternal fire that I do on a regular daily basis, I always have to prepare that fire on the outer mizbeach. Eish tavin shamarti lecha lo tehei ala barosh shel mizbeach achitzo. And therefore the Gemara says, Lamadnu eish lemenorah. That teaches me that the menorah, which is lit on a daily basis, must have its fuel source prepared on the outer altar and not on the golden altar. But the Gemara says that's fine for the menorah. Eish lemachta minayin. But where do you know that the once a year ketoris that's brought into the Holy of Holies, that too must be prepared on the outer altar? Because that's not an eish tamid, that's not an eternal daily fire, that's only a once a year fire. So where do you see that? So the dinu. So on the one hand, you can make a logical argument. Nemra eish b'machta v'nemra eish b'menorah. It says the word eish referring to the Yom Kippur ketores, and it says the word eish for the lighting of the menorah. So therefore, I could argue like this: just like the menorah fire is prepared on the outer altar, so too the Yom Kippur ketores has to be prepared. The fire has to be prepared on the outer altar. Or maybe look at it the other way. Nemra eish b'ketoris v'nemra eish b'machta. The word fire is mentioned by the daily ketoris, and it's mentioned by the Yom Kippur ketoris. Ma lahalan b'samach lo, avkan b'samach lo. Therefore, maybe you'll argue like this: just like the daily ketoris has its fire prepared in a place which is adjacent to the golden altar, namely the outer altar, so too the fuel that is needed for the Yom Kippur ketoris should be prepared on a place which is adjacent to the Holy of Holies, where you're going to be doing the ketoris service, and therefore maybe it should be prepared on the golden altar. So which one is it, the outer altar or the golden altar? Talmud lomar v'lokach malo hamachta gachalei eish me'al hamizbeach milifnei Hashem. And therefore I need another pasuk that's in the context of Yom Kippur in Parshas Acharei Mos. It says that the Kohen Gadol shall take a shovel full of coals, of fire coals, from off of the altar which is in milifnei Hashem, from in front of Hashem. The word milifnei implies that you're dealing with an altar that is partially in front of Hashem and partially not in front of Hashem. Because if it was totally in front of Hashem, it would have said lifnei Hashem. Milifnei Hashem teaches me what kind of altar is only partially in front of God and partially not in front of God. That's the outer altar. Now, what do we mean by that? The outer altar is in the courtyard. A portion of the outer altar, the middle 10 amos, is directly opposite the entrance to the Heichal, and therefore the Mizbeach is partially visible from the Kodesh HaKadoshim. If you were standing at the entrance to the Kodesh HaKadoshim, you could see a portion of the outer altar from the doorway, but not the entire Mizbeach. You would see only the center portion of the outer Mizbeach. And therefore that teaches me that the coals for the Ketoris on Yom Kippur have to be prepared on that outer altar. The itzrich lemichtav me'al hamizbeach, v'itzrich lemichtav milifnei Hashem. But why does the Torah have to write both phrases, remove it from off the altar, and that is milifnei Hashem? I'll tell you why. De'ikos of Rachmana me'al hamizbeach, if the Torah would have told me to remove it off of the mizbeach, hava mina ma mizbeach penimi. I wouldn't know which mizbeach the Torah is talking about. I might think it's talking about the inner golden altar, and therefore kos of Rachmana milifnei Hashem. Therefore, milifnei Hashem says it's the altar which is only partially in front of Hashem, namely the outer altar. V'ikos of Rachmana milifnei Hashem. But if the Torah would have only written that phrase, remove it from the coals which are milifnei Hashem, hava mina dafka milifnei Hashem avol mehai gisu midahai gisa emalo tzricha. Then I would have learned as follows. I would have thought that when I remove the coals from off of the outer mizbeach, those coals have to be burning at a place on the mizbeach which is visible to the Kodesh HaKadoshim in front of Hashem. But let's say I have a pile of wood that's burning, and it's off to the side, and that pile of wood is not directly visible to the Kodesh HaKadoshim. I might have thought that wood is not usable for the fuel for the Yom Kippur Ketoris, and therefore the pasuk says me'al hamizbeach. Just remove it from anywhere on the altar. It doesn't have to be dafka in front of Hashem. Anywhere on that outer altar, if you have fuel coals prepared, then those coals can be used for the Ketoris of Yom Kippur. And with that, we will conclude. You have a wonderful day.